there's going to be a lot more stuff coming out like this right now. We're kind of in the phase right now where financial advisors are realizing what's happening here. They're starting to see, okay, maybe this Bitcoin, since Trump, since Larry Fink, they're starting to see that maybe this thing isn't going anywhere. Maybe we should start looking into it because our clients are going to be asking about it. So we need to be really proactive here. So we're going to see a lot more people like this guy who is, talking about Bitcoin, an expert. That's what the video is called here. Ask the expert. Is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme? Will it replace the dollar? So let's watch this. Let's see what he has to say, and then we'll poke a few holes in it afterwards. John Cunnison. See what he's got. Ask the expert. Is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme?
Cunnison, I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Baker Boyer Bank, and welcome to Ask the Expert. So our video series where we ask all of you to submit questions to us, and we'll do our very best to answer them. But some of the best questions are going to be those where probably the best answer is just another question, right? Those are the ones about an unknown future, and that is what we've got today. So today, we got a question about Bitcoin. Now, the question was a little long and complicated, so I'm going to summarize it quickly. And basically, the question is around, there's some support for cryptocurrency from the new administration. What does it mean for the stability for the global financial system? Is it possible that it could replace U.S. hard currency? And are there any questions around it being basically like a Ponzi scheme? And then there's some questions around concerns about energy use, things like that. So let's jump right in. But before we do, I want to talk just a moment about just new technologies generally. And if we look to history, whether it's AI or the internet or email or automobiles or fire, there's always been people where new technologies are very frightening to them, and there are people who are very excited by them, right? And generally speaking, new technologies are not good or bad inherently. It depends on who's using them and how they're using them. Right, so let's jump into two things. One is, let's first just talk, before we answer the questions, let's talk a little bit about what is cryptocurrency, and then we'll address those questions more specifically. So cryptocurrency, I think the most important thing for me anyway, when I'm understanding this whole topic, is to understand that cryptocurrency didn't just spring up out of nowhere sometime in the last decade. Right? Cryptocurrency was decades in the making, and really it's the result of the study of cryptography, which is this very specific area of computer science, which attempts to keep things, secret and secure in a digital form. Right? So this study of cryptography gave rise to this idea of the blockchain. Now, the blockchain, this is a software system that allows people to make financial transactions digitally. It's completely transparent. It's very secure, virtually unhackable.
So before we go any further here, I should kind of point out the fact that this guy isn't a zero-hour dipshit. He kind of understands Bitcoin in a very low level, but he's put in a little bit of time here. He understands Bitcoin. He understands cryptography. He actually does a pretty good job of explaining, what Bitcoin is for the average person to understand. The problem comes kind of closer to the end for me, but the stuff he's saying right now is fairly accurate, and I think it's easy for people, the average person, to wrap their head around it.
Just because the encryption of that technology is very good, I would explain it. It's very complicated. This is part of what that computer science did. This is the study of cryptography. Now, how did all of that and the creation of, or the study of cryptography, the creation of this thing called a blockchain, which is a kind of software, how did all of that lead then to cryptocurrency? Now, this all happened in January of 2009. And there was a computer scientist who was famous in cryptocurrency circles, a computer scientist whose pseudonym, nobody knows who he really is or what group he represents. But this person is named Satoshi Nakamoto. Right? And in January of 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto released online a software, right, which was basically Bitcoin. Right? And Bitcoin software was released on the blockchain. And many of the things that I'm saying right now may sound very confusing, but the bottom line is that these are ways to facilitate financial transactions online, very transparent, and quite secure. Now, in January of 2009, when Satoshi launched this, it was really more of an academic exercise. Here's a computer scientist who's been studying this for his life, wrote this paper, which established this software protocol, right? And the people using it were his very best friends, right? These were other computer scientists. It was a very small group of the nerdiest nerds you can possibly imagine, having a lot of fun with this software system that they had developed. Now, it turned out that it was a very interesting idea, and obviously it has gained traction, right? And that was the birth of basically cryptocurrency. Now, it's really important, right?
I think we should point out here that it wasn't Satoshi's buddies, wasn't his childhood friends, wasn't his coworkers or family members or anything. It was just other people who were interested in developing this software called Bitcoin. And it wasn't just a fun experiment. It was actually designed with a purpose of destroying the central banks. White paper at the top said peer-to-peer electronic cash. When you're doing something peer-to-peer in this case, that removes the middleman. That removes the central bank. So this wasn't a fun experiment. This was a technology, a protocol with the intentions of separating money from state. Big difference there. This wasn't just for a shits and gig kind of project.
Right here, for me to just take a moment, I'm going to pause and just say that it's important to distinguish between Bitcoin. This is this software system that was created by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009. It was the very first one, right? And cryptocurrency generally, because after Bitcoin, there have been lots of different kinds of cryptocurrency, right? Now we refer to it all as cryptocurrency, but that's like the fact that we often refer to all soft drinks as Coke, right? There is an original Coke and then lots of soft drinks that have followed, right? The original Coke is Bitcoin. Everything else that followed is, some other token that was created on maybe a different blockchain. It's like a different software. Right? And it's really important to note those differences because there's a lot of interesting technology and potential applications that apply to Bitcoin that don't apply to these other cryptocurrencies. Now, to answer one of the questions that was asked in this question, which is basically, is all of this a Ponzi?
Okay, so that's important. And he absolutely nailed that. He said right off the bat, Bitcoin is much different than crypto. Great to understand that, great to point out. The problem comes at the end of this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But he initially separates Bitcoin from crypto, which is good. Everybody should understand that. It seems like more and more people around the world are starting to realize that Bitcoin is much different than every other cryptocurrency out there. It's a much different asset. But then when he answers the questions at the end, you'll see kind of why it didn't really make sense for him to say that.
Ponzi scheme. And I think the answer to that is, in many years, I think a lot of these cryptocurrencies that have sprung up, right? I don't think the answer to that is, in many years, I think a lot of these cryptocurrencies that have sprung up, right? I don't think they'll exist in 3, 5, 10 years. I think that they'll vanish, right? And those, is it fair to call them Ponzi scheme? Maybe. But Bitcoin and some of the technology underlying Bitcoin is actually very, very interesting. And so let's jump in then specifically to answer some of these questions that were put into the mailbag. Well, the first one I want to address is this potentially destabilizing to the global financial system? Now, one way that we could tackle this question is just to look at how big is Bitcoin relative to other financial assets that we're more familiar with, like stocks and bonds. Well, if we look at the global stock market, the global bond market, the global stock market is $130 trillion, global bond market, $140 trillion, right? Bitcoin is just under $2 trillion in total value if you added up all the existing Bitcoin and bits in the world, right? So a fraction, maybe 1% of the total financial assets that are trading. Now, if Bitcoin were to, completely go to zero, if it were to double in value, it's not going to destabilize the financial system. So I think, my sense is that for its potential to destabilize the system, it's highly unlikely. So the other question that was raised was around currency. Now, and I say that because the person who asked the question asked, is it possible that Bitcoin is an attempt or could replace US hard currency? So currency has 3 characteristics that are widely agreed upon. And to be a real currency, you have to have these characteristics. The first one is that it's a widely accepted means of payment, right? Is Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies a widely accepted means of payment? No. So they fail that test. Are they a unit of account? So if I were to ask...
Hold on, Mr. What's this guy's name? John? Hold on, Mr. Expert. Is it accepted as a means of exchange? This guy just says flat out no. I don't think that that's the right answer. I think that there's actually a ton of businesses around the world who already accept Bitcoin, and that number is growing. It's not shrinking. So yes, today it's only 16 years old. Yes, it hasn't turned into more than a $2 trillion asset, but it's also important to note that no asset that has reached the $2 trillion market cap level has failed, which Bitcoin has hit, doubled in the last year. So we went from 1 trillion to 2 trillion in the last year. And the amount of businesses who accept Bitcoin is growing every single day. So today, it might not be accepted by every business, but this trend is growing, and more businesses around the world are beginning to accept Bitcoin, including the company that we have. We accept Bitcoin. Both of the businesses that I am part of accept Bitcoin. So just to flat out say that no people accept this as a means of payment is a straight up objective lie.
Ask you, hey, what does it cost to buy a dozen of eggs in Bitcoin? Would you count? So if I were to ask you of payment, right? Is Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies a widely accepted means of payment? No. So they fail that test. Are they a unit of account? So if I were to ask you, hey, what does it cost to buy a dozen of eggs in Bitcoin? Would you know the answer? Well, no. So it's not a very effective unit of account. The final one.
Another one here, and this is the big one. The first one, he actually said widely accepted. So I would kind of agree with that today. It's not widely accepted, but that's just today. That doesn't mean, just like any technology or protocol, it grows in demand. And it looks like we're trending in one direction, which means that in a couple of years from now, that answer might be a whole lot different. It might be widely accepted. We don't know that for sure. But in this case, just because the average person doesn't know how many sats a loaf of bread costs, that doesn't mean it's not an effective unit of account. That just means that they haven't taken the time to learn Bitcoin. So they have no idea what the conversion is there. But you could essentially value a loaf of bread in sats. You could value a hat in sats. So that's not totally accurate. But the other part too, I think that he's missing here is Bitcoin is actually the most effective unit account that exists. And that's why that's why it has been repricing every other asset and will continue to reprice every asset, because it is a unit of account for a couple reasons. Number one, we know how much there is. The supply of Bitcoin is known. Number two, it's predictable. We know how many Bitcoin there's going to be tomorrow. We know how many Bitcoin there's going to be in 100 years from now. And when you're valuing other assets against something, a unit of account, it's very important to know the denominator there. In this case, will be Bitcoin. So we know the supply today. We know the supply tomorrow, and we can verify that supply any given moment. So Bitcoin is the best unit of account that exists by far. So just kind of to gloss over it like that, because somebody doesn't know how much sats a loaf of bread is, that's a horrible argument. Bitcoin is the best possible unit of account that has existed and will probably ever exist.
Is a store of value. Here's where it gets a little more interesting. If we ask the question, is it an effective store of value? Someone may point to the volatility of many cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, and say, these are incredibly volatile. It's not a very effective store of value, right? But some of the Bitcoin enthusiasts, in particular, maybe other cryptocurrency enthusiasts as well, may point to the U.S. dollar and say, well, over long periods of time, the U.S. dollar loses value. It loses value to inflation. And part of the reason that's the case is because the total value of all the existing US dollars is not finite, right? It can expand as the Federal Reserve, basically creates more money, as the banking system creates more money, right? So that creates inflation. It can create a reduction in the value of the dollar, its purchasing power. So one of the use cases that a lot of cryptocurrency enthusiasts point to is the idea that, and this is specific, and this is where it's really important to distinguish between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, is that Bitcoin, 21 million Bitcoin, were created when the software was created, right? It's in the rules around how that software is used. There are 21 million Bitcoin, and there will never be any more than 21 million Bitcoin. There's a scarcity there, and that's what the Bitcoin enthusiasts will point to say that it potentially has a use case as a store of value, right? So it is not a currency, right? And it's very unlikely that it'll ever be a currency. But could it be a store of value? That's something that only the future will tell. So if I were just to summarize all my thoughts here, the one would be, should we worry about Bitcoin being, actually, let me back up. Should we worry about cryptocurrency being a Ponzi scheme? Some of them certainly are not going to be around in 3 to 5 years. Is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme, or some of the more established cryptocurrencies? Well, time will tell. We don't know. It's very early days in this new technology. The other
See, that's the kind of stuff that bothers me. And I'm guilty of this myself too, sometimes, where I just you can tell that this guy's, this isn't edited, which I very much appreciate. You can tell that he's just talking on base what he knows. But for him to just say that, is Bitcoin and crypto a Ponzi scheme? He basically said the cryptos, a lot of them, and this is just I would call it a buzzword for people who haven't spent a whole lot of time in Bitcoin. They say most cryptos won't be around in 3 to 5 years. Well, you don't really know that. You're just saying that because that's the information that you've received. You don't know that. But at the same time, he says that Bitcoin, is it a Ponzi scheme? Time will tell. Well, no, time won't tell. Bitcoin is objectively not a Ponzi scheme. And so I don't know if he intentionally lumped these two together or what his intention was here, but he outright is misleading people here and telling people that time will tell if Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme or not. It's not. It's objectively not a Ponzi scheme. So for the people who actually, are paying attention to this and might not know much about Bitcoin, they're now thinking, well, this guy, this expert, he said it doesn't really seem like a Ponzi scheme, but time will tell. It might turn out to be a Ponzi scheme. No, this is not a Ponzi scheme, objectively. So that's the kind of stuff that that bothers me with this whole thing. But anyways, let's finish this off.
Their question is, could this potentially destabilize the global financial system? Unlikely, given its relative size. And then the final question is it likely that some of these cryptocurrencies will replace the US dollar as the currency of the United States or the widely accepted one? It's unlikely, simply because it's not particularly useful in the ways that a real currency is useful. So those are things that the dollar is actually pretty good at. So this may be simply another new financial innovation, a digitization of a medium of exchange. So I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to a member of your Baker Borio team. We have a lot of fun talking about these issues, and we hope that you'll put more questions into the mailbag so we can hit them next month in our Ask the Expert series. Thanks for joining me.
So, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on that because, again, I can tell this guy has done a little bit of homework in terms of Bitcoin. He's not a 0 hour dipshit like a lot of financial advisors are. He kind of has a decent understanding of Bitcoin. I'm not gonna lie. He's put in some time to at least try to learn it, which I appreciate for his client's sake. But you know, when you title a video "Ask the Expert" and you're talking about Bitcoin, clearly not an expert on that. Clearly had a bunch of holes in whatever he was talking about. And the problem is that a lot of people rely on information from these people. The guy's wearing a suit. The average person, if you looked at a guy wearing a hoodie and a hat and a guy with a suit, they're probably going to trust the guy with the suit a little bit more. That's just how our society works. So that's unfortunate. And I think that financial advisors themselves are very they're not incentivized to tell their clients about Bitcoin for a lot of reasons. But the main reason is if one of their clients wants to own Bitcoin and actually take self-custody of their Bitcoin, the fees that these financial advisors live on, they stop getting those fees. So the incentives for financial advisors to learn about Bitcoin are not in their favor. But for their clients' sake, they should absolutely be going down these roads and trying to explore this as much as they possibly can. And again, there are a lot of financial advisors out there who are actually doing this right now. A few that I work with, a few that I've talked to in the US and overseas in the UK, who are being very proactive in this for the sake of their clients. They realize that, yes, they're going to lose some of their fees from their clients, but at least they're going to maintain their trust and maintain their clients' wealth. So it's a very big trade-off, I think, for financial advisors to try to, how much time are they going to allocate to try to figure out Bitcoin? That's kind of where we are right now. So I do appreciate guys like that coming on the internet and, speaking somewhat positively about Bitcoin, having a decent understanding of it. But the problem is that a lot of people put a lot of trust in people like this. And when they're blatantly, I shouldn't say blatantly, I really don't think that his intentions are wrong with this. It's just that he doesn't have the knowledge that a lot of people in Bitcoin do have. And so it's very easy for somebody who spent time in Bitcoin to kind of poke holes in these things, but the average person does not have that ability. So yeah, it's we're going to see more of this. There's going to be much more experts come on the internet, start talking about things within Bitcoin, and just not really having a deep enough understanding to be talking about this stuff on YouTube or online. So important to know the differences between the truth, reality, Bitcoin, stuff like that. So anyways, I wanted to share that. Levels of ignorance are infinite. Misinformation is rampant. Lies are contagious. 100%. Exactly. He doesn't recommend because he doesn't get any fees off it. When is that video from? That was like posted a couple days ago, I think. Let me see if I can. I'm pretty sure it was last week, 4 days ago.